Thank you, everybody. Good morning. This is Louis Lowe from Foley Lardner, and thank you so much for joining our latest workshop on bridging the gap between your tech company and Washington, D.C. I am broadcasting live from the Sierra Nevada office of Foley Lardner with my sunglasses on because the future is so darn bright. And I'm just delighted to have a rock star group of folks joining us today. My partners, Natasha Allen and Catherine Zhu from Foley Lardner, and we've got a really impressive startup CEO of a cybersecurity company, Jyoti. We've got Mr. Silicon Valley guy, Brett Waters, and of course, Rebecca from Decode, an organization that helps startups navigate the Washington, D.C. Scene. And without further ado, I'm just going to ask everybody to do a quick 10 or 15 second intro of yourselves. And Natasha, why don't you kick us off?
Great. Thank you, Louis. Hello, everyone. Natasha Allen. As Louis mentioned, I'm a partner at Foley Lardner. I am a business/corporate attorney/M&A attorney. So my clients are innovators of technology. So I'm very lucky to work with very smart individuals. Typically, clients are in the area of AI, AR, life sciences and robotics. But otherwise, very happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Catherine, you're up.
Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine. I'm also attorney at Foley Lardner. My practice focuses on data privacy and technology transactions. Similar to Natasha as well as Louis, I work with a lot of companies who are very innovative on the forefront of technology, advising them through various privacy and data matters that might come up, as well as tech transactions matters, including contracting with various parties, including the federal government. And very excited to be here today and looking forward to an illuminating discussion.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm going to flip the slide over, and Rebecca Gavald is a managing director at Decode. Rebecca, could you introduce yourself and Decode? And you get 30 seconds because you're kind of the star of the show.
Oh, awesome. 15 more seconds. So, hi, everybody. Rebecca Gavald, managing director of tech programs at Decode. So what Decode does is our overarching mission is to get better commercial tech into government and get government missions to perform better. So we have two sides of our business. On our tech side of the house, which is where I am, that is where we train venture-backed startup companies with everything they need to know to be successful in the government market. So pricing, use cases, everything about contracts techniques, FAR and non-FAR. And then we do some business development and advisory services for tech companies to help them break into the government. We've worked with over 115 venture-backed startups since our inception about 6 years ago, to include 10 unicorns. So we are stage agnostic, and we're also tech agnostic in terms of the tech companies we're helping break into government. And then on the flip side of our business, on the government side, is where we teach government how to find and contract with these non-traditional tech companies. So we teach government how they can use their own contracting methods. Oftentimes they don't know how to actually get these tech companies on contracted in mission. So we're hitting both sides of the market to actually get the tech in the door. Prior to joining Decode, I was in the federal government. So I was at CIA for 13 years, the last 2 of which I was working with In-Q-Tel, the venture capital arm of the intelligence community, to help their venture-backed tech companies get into CIA. So great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Rebecca. And Jyoti, you're up next. Jyoti Rosenberg, if you haven't seen his TED Talk, is legendary, inspirational. I invite everybody to listen to it. But the reason we asked Jyoti to come and join us today is that he's the CEO of a cybersecurity company called Dover Microsystems, which he's going to tell us about, and has had some success and certainly great experience contracting with the government. Jyoti.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm a 9-time startup founder, what I like to call an incorrigible entrepreneur. Yeah, so incorrigible, not serial. It's a better word for it. And this one goes back to 2010 when, as a DARPA program, it was a reaction to, some of you may remember, it had a funny name. It was an attack, very bad attack, called Stuxnet, which it ended up doing something I guess we probably all appreciate. It took out a lot of the Iranian centrifuges, but it taught the world how to do these pretty serious attacks. And you can trace all the ransomware back to this specific attack, because it's how they learned how to do a lot of this. What DARPA wanted us to do was figure out, well, how do we stop this? How do we stop these attacks? And we have figured it out, but it's going to take a long time because it's got to get into the infrastructure. But what we have come up with is a way to actually make the processors in our equipment able to tell if what they're doing is the correct thing or the attacker's bidding. And if it's the attacker's bidding, we make sure that the processor stops doing what it's doing, doesn't do any further damage, and figures out a way to recover. So it has to get into our hardware, which is what we're in the process of doing. As you can imagine, the military is more understanding of and more appreciative of this level of security than even the commercial segment. And we're only an 18-person company, so dealing with the federal government is challenging, and we've been figuring out how to do that, and we have somebody that helps us, and that part of our business is growing very nicely. We're actually going to be on a project for what's called the Air Force Nuclear Weapons Center. Their job isn't that important. They're just protecting the intercontinental ballistic missile systems. I'll stop there.
Small job. Jossie, thank you so much for joining us, and we're going to be back to you frequently and often. Before we dive in, though, I wanted to give my good friend and legendary Silicon Valley guy, Brett Waters, just a minute to introduce himself, although I don't think he needs any introduction. Brett?
I'm mostly legendary in Louie's mind because I bought him lunch a couple of times. So I'm Brett Waters. I've lived in Silicon Valley my whole life. Founded and run 3 software companies, and today I teach entrepreneurship at Stanford University, and I coach startup CEOs at the Miller Center for Social Entrepreneurship, and I run a startup accelerator called Fourthly, and I'm super happy to be here.
Thank you for joining, Brett. We're going to kind of dive right into the topics at hand, but just to set the stage, as I said at the outset, the future is so bright that I'm wearing sunglasses. We're at a moment in time that I've never seen before, where the velocity of new startups, the velocity of funding is at a place I've just never seen it in my entire career, and at the same time, the federal government and state governments are looking to bring the world back to work and get the economy going again in places where it's not. And Natasha, I'd love for you to kind of set the stage for us and tell us a few words about the stimulus programs that we think are coming down the pike from Washington.
Yeah, so it's been interesting times, as Louie mentioned in the beginning. The plan, it's called the Biden American Jobs Plan. It's not enacted yet. Had set out to spend $2 trillion. I think as of late, that's been reduced to $1 trillion, which is still an unsurmountable amount of money, which is in addition to the already spending that's happening, which is about $400 billion. In terms of what the themes are around this bill, it's really surrounding climate change, access to economic opportunities, and competition. So competition is mainly in the technology realm. So the government is really looking to startups to help kind of supercharge and push us into innovating a lot of different areas. Some of which that were touched on is there's a whole new regime that they're doing called R&D and innovation. So a lot of countries, such as I'm from Canada. So in Canada, we had a SHRED program, which was very lucrative in terms of startups being able to innovate and be provided various tax credits. So what the Biden administration is suggesting is that they'll be putting about $180 billion towards this R&D investment to help tech companies commercialize various innovations. Really what they're focused on and what they're looking to do is to push towards what they're calling emerging technologies. So that's dealing with, quantum computing, advancing climate, energy change, also dealing with cybersecurity, and finally biotechnology. So there's this whole culmination of funds that are available for companies, startups, even for laboratories to get funding to push the needle and to move a lot of these different projects and innovations that the government's trying to move forward to get them into fruition.
So we've got all of these new startups being formed as a result of the fourth industrial revolution, as a result of the pandemic and the being at home with time on their hands, government stimulus, and now we've got potentially $2 trillion coming down the pike available for technology companies to a great degree, and really I think that it sets the stage for our discussion today. As you know, as we start our journey, startups come to us with three big problems. What is their legal structure? How do they raise money? And then how do they have a financial structure to report to their investors on where that money has gone and where it's going, and when they're going to be cash out and when they're going to need to raise again. But once that's set up, Catherine Zhu and our commercial contracts and privacy teams are helping companies really figure out how to commercialize and monetize their products. And increasingly, we're seeing that federal, state, city, and local governments are a critical part of the roadmap to getting to success. And I think that many people are great at developing products, but they don't necessarily know how to sell. And certainly, selling into the government is a whole world unto itself. And that's one of the reasons I was so delighted to have this group of experts join us today. And Rebecca, tell me how you get connected to technology companies, at the outset at Decode. How do you interact with them? Do they come to you? Do you go to them?
So it's a mix, actually. We engage with technology companies in a variety of different ways, both inbound and outbound. So from an outbound perspective, what we're doing is government is coming to us and saying, we need help finding tech companies in this particular realm. So then Decode has a tech scouting team where we go out and we find tech companies that are at a certain stage and have technologies that can address these core government use cases that government is asking us to go out and find. So that's what we're doing on the outbound side. On the inbound side, Decode works with a lot of the VCs in the Valley and across the US. So we're working with NEA, Google Ventures, Founders Fund, Excel, like you name them, you name it, we know the VC. And what they're doing is sending us companies, because if their companies want to go federal, as everybody kind of knows, it's pretty brutal. And so if there's any way you can shorten the time to revenue in that market to prove out whether or not it is or is not a place that you should be, it's money well spent. So we're working with some of the top tier VCs to have them send companies our way. The other piece, we just recently rolled this out. We have, and we're about to launch sort of a marketing campaign to generate awareness of it. We have an online platform now where we have all of our content and curriculum that we've developed over the past 6 years of everything anyone in your company needs to know about the federal market to help them break in. And then it's also a community platform that allows companies to talk to each other about share lessons learned and find teaming opportunities. So we're about to do a full outbound push there just to let people know that this exists. This is a resource for them that can help them sort of short circuit their time into whether or not they want to get into the federal market.
Thanks for that, Rebecca. When is the right time to engage with government? Is it at the MVP stage? Is it when you're looking to establish a proof of concept? Is it after you already have some amount of a commercial shipment to private industry? How do you advise entrepreneurs in when to engage with the government?
So there's no one size fits all. So I'm sure Jaffe at Dover definitely has some opinions here because it seems like he's developing specifically for government in some of his companies. But so what Decode takes a look at is what's the overarching rule. So for tech companies who are just developing their product, who may be at seed or Series A, government is a really time-intensive and difficult market to break into. So it takes a long time to get to your first contract. And so you have to have a long enough runway to make it to there. And you also have to have enough money and resources if you win that contract to actually deliver on it. The government obviously has a lot of contractual requirements and how you deliver things and how you document how you deliver things that most startups are not equipped to handle, or, it's just not where you want to put your time and money in terms of making sure that you expand and grow. So what we like to see is usually commercial traction, a proven commercial market, and then you're trying to open up the federal market for your company. That's where our sweet spot is. Now, there are definitely great companies out there that are developing technology specifically for government, but where we play is, all right, you've already got that commercial traction, your product has been tested out, it's working already, you're selling it privately, and you're thinking that the federal sector is a place to go. And so that's really where we find the sweet spot, because we also don't want tech companies to go out and pay for 5 federal salespeople right out of the gate, because you're going to end up firing probably the first 4 before you land a deal and then realize that it did actually take everybody's work, those first 4 to get there. It just took so long, you weren't able to attribute it to the first guy.
Thank you, Rebecca. Brett, you've got this Zoom-based accelerator called Fourthly. Tell us about that.
Well, it's a Zoom-based accelerator, Louis. Yeah, so it's a startup accelerator program. Just started it last year. The name Fourthly comes from the fact that the World Economic Forum says we're entering now the 4th Industrial Revolution. And that one of the things that makes the 4th Industrial Revolution different than the previous 3 is that this one's happening in clusters all over the world. In other words, it's not just Silicon Valley today. There are clusters of innovation and clusters of entrepreneurship all over the world. And certainly in the U.S., we're seeing it in Austin, we're seeing it in Bend, Oregon, we're seeing it in New York, right? And so, part of the idea of it being a Zoom-based startup accelerator program for the 4th Industrial Revolution is that you can join from anywhere. And we have entrepreneurs all over the world.
And Brett, I'm grateful for the opportunities to meet many of the companies that have come through your accelerator. Are you finding that any of them have products to sell to the government?
For sure. But I think Rebecca just did a really good job of articulating the reasons why, for an early stage company, that may not be the right market for them to be focused on. That, as I said, Rebecca just stated it very, very clearly, which is that the sell cycles are long, and the performance cycles tend to be long and rigorous, and both of those are tough on an early stage startup.
And Joffy Rosenberg, CEO of Dover Microsystems, tell us about your engagement with the government as a vendor. When in the life cycle of Dover did it begin, and how have you battled the incredibly long sales cycle?
Well, Rebecca implied I wasn't going to agree with her. Actually, I agree with her completely. We were exactly at the stage of having had a couple of very important big commercial contracts, and I didn't have a plan to actually get into DoD work even in 2020, except that the pandemic caused me to take the company on a partial pivot and go after some government work. We did it in an unusual way, and when you are an early stage company, if you can get into one of the like Air Force Research Lab, which is where we got started, then they're looking for things that are at an earlier stage of maturity anyway, and by getting connected to a program manager at the Air Force Research Lab, which I was able to do just through a lot of different personal connections, then he basically short-circuited everything, and the sales cycle was 1 month, and we had a contract. So that's leveraging all of your connections, which of course is how we all get some of our early commercial customers too. So it's no different. So, and then on that, I built up by doing some SBIR work. So for people that aren't familiar with that acronym, Small Business Innovation Research Grants. Many years ago, Congress passed a law that if you are a government agency that is letting out research contracts, then you must take 2% of your budget and make it available to small businesses as defined by the Small Business Administration. So for many organizations, it's considered a tax. You know, they don't like it, but some have really embraced it, and the Air Force is one that has truly embraced it and has turned it into something that is going to actually be a significant revenue base for us that we can count on, because we're just going to kind of crank through sort of a continuous stream of these SBIR contracts, and they're not tiny. I mean, the phase twos are 750,000 and up to 1.5 million. That's pretty significant when you're a seed or Series A company.
Jyoti, would you recommend to an entrepreneur to engage with the federal government using a specialized sales force, or would you recommend that they go direct?
No, not a specialized sales force yet at an early stage. And you don't, at an early stage, you don't want to be contracting directly with the government. It's way too labor intensive. You have to hire, a room full of people who do government contracts. So don't do that. So they've tried. They haven't completely succeeded, but they've tried to make the SBIRs different. They're a lot more lightweight. You still need legal help on what are called data rights assertions, and I just want to make sure that word is in everybody's heads. That okay, there's something really dangerous here. Make sure you go get help on your data rights assertions so that you don't give away rights to your equipment, your ideas to the government. And don't try to figure it out yourself either. You got to get specialized help for that. But I think that there is one other, very important key, which is the whole key, I believe, and some of the other people here can, agree or disagree, that this idea of, you get a phase one, they're small. SBR phase ones typically are 3 months, $50,000, with the entire goal being find a customer. And you may need some help with that. And we ended up hiring a group called New Course Strategies in Virginia, who's got a lot of experience in doing this. And they gave us a really long list of names that are, potential customers. And finding a customer is the absolute key to landing a phase two. And we went down the list and we hit pay dirt. We ended up getting the chief scientist of the Air Force Nuclear Weapons Center. And he's an amazing guy. He's actually really nice and approachable and doesn't make you use his military title at all. We can just call him Greg.
Rebecca, you've been on both sides of this, and I'd love to hear from you your kind of view of the overall sales cycle to a government entity.
Yeah, so I have not disagreed yet with anything that Jyoti has said, particularly with the going direct versus through a partner in the specialized sales team. So, and particularly with the SBIR program, I would agree that the Air Force definitely has done more than other government agencies to make that as palatable to small companies as they possibly can. The other great part about the phase one SBIR, those are a little bit easier to win than the phase twos. Because you have to find that customer, as Jyoti said, and there is a little bit of MOU fatigue. So in order to get a phase two, you have to have a customer sign an MOU. And so we're dealing with that on the government side. So trying to ease the DoD's pain on MOU fatigue there and how we can help them deal with that. But the great thing about an SBIR phase one is it's essentially a hunting license. So once you know how to use it, you can move to a phase three. And what a phase three inside DoD and DHS can use them too. What that means is that if you go and you meet somebody and they ask, how can I buy you? Which is the key question when you go meet a potential government client. You can say, oh, well, I'm a SBIR phase 1 winner. We can move to a phase 3. And then you might need some help with the contracts officer to get there. But when you're talking about selling to the government writ large, the real problem inside government is that there's no such thing as a unicorn. And in a unicorn, what you need is the program office end user who wants to use your product, the contracts officer who knows how to actually do the paperwork to get your product, and the budget owner who actually has the money to say, yes, I do. Inside the government, typically those 3 roles are going to be 3 separate people. So, and that's why federal sales is so specialized, because when you go into the government, you need to know who those 3 people are. Or another thing you can do is go in, find the program office of somebody who wants to use your product, figure out what partners, so what systems integrators have contracts in that office. And you can do that through a number of different tools to figure out where contracts have landed, since it's all public data, and then figure out the way for the government to buy you. So it's a very research intensive process to find the right person, figure out how they can pay for you and what contract they can leverage. And so that's typically why companies will say, oh gosh, I just need to hire a federal salesperson right now. There's no way that I can do that myself. And there are different ways you can get at that problem, and cheaper ways to figure out the federal market on those pieces before you hire somebody. But when you hire somebody in the federal market, that's what they're going to be looking for.
I have one question.
Go for it, Natasha.
If you don't mind. How would it be different if a startup engages at the state level as opposed to the federal government, or is it the same process?
So we only focus on federal, so I unfortunately don't have the expertise on the state level to be able to say. I don't know if the other 2 do.
I would not go anywhere near state or local government until you're really big.
Got it. It's good to know.
Catherine, I'd love to.
They haven't. I'm sorry. They're not as sophisticated as the federal government. As many complaints as we all can share about the federal government, the state governments just don't have the processes set up. You would have to have like a major inside track, I think, to have success in the state government. And I'm in a sophisticated state, in a lot of respects. By the way, this thing is Silicon Valley to Washington, and Louis seems to have a little confusion about geography. I'm in Boston.
The global Silicon Valley, East Coast version, it's all the same. Jyoti, I appreciate your poking fun at me. I deserve it. Catherine, tell me what you do. You get a contract from the government, and you're looking to close. How do you negotiate that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Louis. And I would first echo what has been said, is the expectation that it's going to be a long sales cycle compared to if you're used to private sector negotiation and procurement contracts. It's very much more time intensive and a different timeline when you're dealing with the federal government. In addition, it can be, I would also echo what was said before, that you probably will need either a lawyer, legal team, or an officer who's familiar with the contracting process with the federal government to push those through, because there will be a lot of terms in that contract that you probably would not see in a private sector contract. It might vary depending on the type of sale you're making to the federal government. A lot of what we talked about up until now has been on commercial item acquisitions by the federal government. This is probably the sale that slightly resembles private market commercial contracting. It applies to goods that are sold to the general, being offered to the general public on a private, non-commercial, non-governmental basis, and then the government's looking into purchasing these. Even though, however, for these contracts, as well as other contracts with the federal government, we'll see certain clauses they're called FAR clauses under regulations that need to be flowed down and incorporated. And this can range from data rights assertion, which impact IP ownership and licenses potentially in your technology, export controls and sanction. There might be, certain limitations on changing the contract, as well as termination rights, compliance requirements in terms of labor or foreign acquisition, and also, special procedures for handling disputes. So there can be a lot of things that are mandated to be included, and then having somebody who can distinguish between what those are and what are the commercial items are going to be also important in that negotiation process.
I was expecting you to say, Catherine, that there's not much negotiating with the federal government. It's more like making sure you understand what you're signing up for and that you set yourself up for success by implementing all of the requirements of the contract. And I think that's oftentimes the way you contract with any large entity that is imposing its terms on you, a growth stage private company.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely the flip side of that, is that you probably will have to do a lot of assessment of what you're signing up for sure.
I'm looking into the Q&A engine, and we're seeing some questions about tips and tricks for contracting with the government. And one question that's popping is lobbying. Is that something that you need to do if you want to be selling into the government? And Rebecca, I would love to get your perspective on what you tell companies. Let's say it's an NEA-backed company at Series C stage. It's got 50 million of revenue, and it's got a real product. It's a robust product. And they're looking to expand by selling into the government. How do they do that? Is lobbying involved?
Typically we tell them don't pay for a lobbyist until you're absolutely sure you really need to. There's a lot of different ways you can get to scale in government and get to program of record, which is a lot of what we're talking about here, without paying for a lobbyist. That's not to say that they're not important, but in terms of where you want to spend your limited resources and your time, I would focus more on sales than I would on lobbying. Now, one of the things that it's actually an interesting question, because Decode recently took a look at this exact thing. We keep telling companies, if you have limited time and resources, don't spend it on lobbying, but yet there is some benefit from it for sure. So there's a new Alliance for Commercial Technology and Government that Decode is a part of, along with many other players that sort of are helping tech companies figure out government. And the idea behind it was to give some of these smaller tech companies, join them together, band them together so that they can go ahead and lobby as one for some key changes to make government contracting easier for these non-traditional tech companies, because obviously the Amazon, the Googles, the big tech companies of the world, they spend a boatload of money on lobbying. So let's bring some of the smaller players together to get those key messages to Congress. And so it's been really interesting to see that group grow. Definitely happy to share information about it. Dave Vorland runs it. So it's been very interesting to see these startup companies join that group and use that as a lobbying arm, which is a lower cost way of doing it, again, than going out and paying for your own.
We are unfortunately out of time, but I wanted to thank our awesome panelists, Rebecca Gavalt, Managing Director at DC Code in Washington, DC, Jyoti Rosenberg, Founder and CEO of Dover Microsystems, and the Silicon Valley guy, Brett Waters. Catherine, do you want to offer up any final takeaways for our audience?
Sure, yeah. So, today's discussion was really illuminating, I think, for me, and hopefully many members of the audience, in terms of what you should be thinking about when selling to the government, when building for the government. We've heard many different perspectives. Some of the takeaways for me was, the government really is a potential opportunity for additional revenue, for potentially funding that may be overlooked due to, a very arduous or procedural negotiation process. And that being said, if you are to try to engage in this space, there's a lot of resources that are out there to help you, as we have heard from today. And it's also really important to be aware of what you're agreeing to, and the steps you would have to take, more so than when you're dealing in the private sector. Back to you, Louis.
Catherine, the future is so bright. I'm wearing sunglasses. Thanks for hosting us. And Natasha, please sign us off for the day.
Great. Again, thank you all for attending. Again, it's interesting times. We'll see what happens with the Biden administration. At least we know that they are definitely looking to get technology into government and making it more efficient and effective. So hopefully you learned a lot from our panelists today in terms of how to engage the government and how to engage government contracts. If you have any questions or would like to reach out, we are always looking to talk to individuals about their businesses and how we can help. You'll see on the last slide all of our contact details, but until next time, have a great afternoon.